Hey everyone, Sounds Tech and Travel here, again with another unboxing of a device and product here. This is actually a motherboard over here, MSI's Gaming Edge Wi-Fi, the X570 chipset. I previously did do another review and unboxing of an X570 based chipset motherboard. So this is basically one tier lower. You can always check out that other video. This motherboard is geared for the AMD Ryzen processor, second and third generation, and of course with a BIOS update, fourth generation as well too. Not planning to use this motherboard with either third or fourth generation. I'm going to be using it with a second generation 2700 CPU. Little backstory though, the particular build I had in mind with this board, or actually the build I have in mind, I actually was going to get my hands on a B550 based chipset motherboard, and I actually did purchase one. Doing a little bit of research online, I found out that second generation Ryzen CPUs, even if whether they're APUs or not, are not compatible, so that didn't really work out too well. I have previously already purchased this particular motherboard before for 2 builds so far, and now this will be a third, and I actually do have in mind for a fourth and possibly a fifth, just basically upgrades from first gen Ryzen motherboard and CPU through a third gen motherboard chipset and possibly a third or fourth gen CPU. So this motherboard's actually pretty solid in terms of being future proof. So let's go ahead and pop it open. As always, let's just go ahead and just take a look at the back. Some features here. Some one nice little feature that it's obviously very not a big deal to some people, but I actually enjoy it, is the backplate is actually built on the board itself, so no accidentally forgetting that backplate or it coming off at some point when you remove the board, etc, etc. It's actually built in. And of course this board definitely does have is LED lights down here as well too. Not too many as Gaming Pro class motherboards. Usually you see some LEDs here and possibly around the chipset cooler. Taking a look here at the USB ports you have, seems like it's about 8. One of them is a Type-C Gen 2 obviously. And of course your 2 little USB ports and a very magical PS2 port, which does make installing Windows 7, I know, cringe for some people, but some people really do enjoy using it. Windows 7 installation is a lot easier with that PS2 port. If that's something you're interested in, go ahead and check out that video of getting Windows 7 to work on third generation X570 based chipset motherboards. Bit of a process, but definitely go ahead and check it out. So let's go ahead and check this out here. Open this up. Take out the board. Separate little box. And a couple little things over here. Obviously a driver CD, which probably no one really uses anymore. We just go ahead and download them. Looks like a little, well, I thought this might be a little quick installation guide, but it seems like it's probably just a little thing with little stickers and hey, other stuff I have to offer. Thank you for purchasing an MSI product. And a couple little labels here to attach to cables. Actually, these are a nice little feature. I haven't really been using them myself, but definitely something to bear in mind. Oh, that's your screw for your M2 drive, SSD. Keep this in mind. So actually, I've purchased some of these boards from them and completely overlooked this screw. And of course, some other little manuals over here as well too. And of course, your actual motherboard manual as well too. Here's your quick installation guide that I was actually looking for. And many times some people just refer to this just to know where the front header panel cables go to on the board itself. Looks like our LED connector. Sometimes you can use this. This one particularly is used mostly to connect for the CPU if you're using a stock cooler for the LED function there. Your little Wi-Fi and Bluetooth antennas, that actually does give you Bluetooth capability as well too. And a couple of SATA cables as well too. And of course this little MSI True Gaming little adhesive little badge, as I like to call it. Let's get the box out of the way. And look at our board right over here. Of course I had to put everything on top of the board, so now I gotta take everything off. This board definitely does have a little bit of weight to it because of the coolers. I probably pinched the bag there. Go ahead and flip this over. And just a little close-up view with the anti-static bag still on. Take a quick look here. There's a socket for our Ryzen CPU, 4 DIMM slots for memory. Our power connector over here. Go ahead and face it this way instead. And up here, a couple of connectors there for CPU power. Just bear in mind you have a 8-pin connector and also a 4. Usually if you want to do overclocking, you'll probably need 2 8 pins. I don't really overclock too much, but there's something to keep in mind there too. This will give you slightly lesser options than the next higher tier motherboard. A couple of SATA ports over here, appears about 6. There's your USB 3 header, one here, and one down here as well too. So sticker here is coming off. No big deal there. There's our chipset cooler right over here. Obviously take this off when you're ready to go. And appears about, there's actually 2 slots for your M2 NVMe SSDs, one up here underneath this cooler right over here. This can be removed, and there's one down here as well too, as you can see very clearly out. Obviously the top one is controlled directly by the CPU itself. The other one is controlled by the chipset. So if you're going to be using just one drive over here, definitely use the top one because you'll be getting the best speed and the best lowest latency, and some other options over there. Just another look over here on the actual board, just the back plate, some slots, ports over here. There's your antenna, your PS2 slot, USB 2 ports, and the rest appear to be USB 3 and a combination of 3 and 3.1 or 3.2 USB ports over here. Your LAN connection, and of course your audio connections right over here. This board definitely does have its generous amount of fan headers. Appears like there's about 4 down here, which is one of the first I see on the motherboard where they basically have all the fan connectors in the same location, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending where your fan locations are. Obviously, if you are going to be using fans on the upper part of the motherboard as an exhaust, or possibly connected to the board to a radiator for water cooling, these particular fan ports here may be a little far, so just something to bear in mind there as well too. There are some additional fan ports over here for the CPU, and also from it appears basically, just one fan over here for a pump, which you can probably use for that fan for the radiator and water cooling if you'd like. I'm just trying to see if there's another fan cooler here that's really intended for the rear of the computer, and I actually don't see one. So you actually, if you have any rear computers, multiple ones usually, or just one, you have to use these connections down here. A quick note before I continue here. If you are planning to use this board with the latest generation of Ryzen, this board will support it, but not without a BIOS update, as I mentioned earlier. So something to keep in mind. Don't go ahead and purchase this board and a 4th generation Ryzen CPU and just think it will work out of the box. You'll definitely need to perform a BIOS update. But a little FYI, because I know MSI has actually done this with their boards in the past. Over here in the box, you do see where it says obviously supports 2nd, 3rd generation Ryzen CPU, so it doesn't support 1st. And up here, it is Ryzen 3000 desktop ready. So I actually have noticed on X570 boards and the other boards from the similar 2nd generation class, they actually put a little sticker on here to indicate that the board has been already updated with the latest BIOS, and just giving you a peace of mind that you actually do not need to do it yourself, and the board will work with the latest generation Ryzen CPU out of the box. So I'm guessing in a few weeks or towards the middle or end of December, if you actually do try to purchase a board, make sure that sticker is on there if you're planning to use the latest gen Ryzen CPU. Otherwise, you'll have to use an older class CPU to get the BIOS to work correctly with your new class CPU. I believe AMD still has a program where they can send you a very low class AMD CPU to allow you to update the BIOS. I think they even include a little heatsink as well too. And it's basically a loaner. you do the task, update the BIOS, and you send the CPU back. I don't believe they need the heatsink anymore, but just something to keep in mind if you do not have an older class Ryzen CPU to assist you with that. Your two options are to go through with that particular swap program for AMD. They'll send you the CPU, you update the BIOS, send it back, or just look out for a motherboard, again, with a little sticker saying that, hey, this is, in this case, will be Ryzen 5000 desktop ready, which I'm sure this board will probably have that sticker, probably right over this one at some point. Here we are in the BIOS of the motherboard over here. See a couple of details up here, your CPU, memory speed, and some other details here as well too, including your BIOS version at this time, and also date. I did actually go ahead and switch over to the advanced view mode here. I'm going to just go ahead and switch back to easy mode so you get a view of what that's like over here. And you'll see here basically the same details up here. CPU, memory, storage, fan, info, some other options on the left, some other options down here to update the BIOS on the motherboard. Favorites, I'm guessing that's referring to overclocking favorites and whatnot. Your hardware monitor for controlling the fans, and down here, very easy toggle on and off options to turn on or off integrated devices on this board. So let me go ahead and switch back to the advanced view over here. I'm going to start to go over each little section down here. So under settings, basically you do see a couple more options. System status basically give you a list of devices that are currently plugged in, particularly storage devices. We do have here, I do have here a Samsung SSD for the time being, not an NVMe drive at this time, and also a mechanical hard drive plugged in as well to two SATA ports right there. Some other information here on BIOS and BIOS build dates as well too. Clicking down here will just give you a little bit more deeper in-depth information on the motherboard itself. Going back here, we'll go ahead and click on Advanced. See a bunch of more options over here, giving you some more options for the really in-depth and advanced motherboard setups as well too. I actually do see an option here for cryptocurrency mine, which is pretty interesting, but not something I'll be using at this time. Some other settings here. Over here, basically to turn on or off devices built onto the motherboard. You can actually see I did turn off the Wi-Fi on this board at this time. Everything else is on for the time being. You can always toggle your SATA mode here as well too, especially if you're going to be using stuff in RAID. USB configuration, basically for USB 3 enable disable options over here. Some I/O configuration. This setup is actually probably something you may or may not even actually use. Power management setup. Some options here as well too. Windows OS configuration, whether you're using Windows 10, which is actually using for UEFI, and some other options here as well too. But usually this is something you probably shouldn't change, but feel free if you know what you're doing. Some options here as well too when you turn the computer on, or how the computer can actually be turned on from all these options. So if you actually want to turn on the computer from sleep mode by using the keyboard, here you go. Secure erase, some options for wiping out the SSD, which is pretty interesting, and also a self-test for the NVMe drive as well too. Moving on here, and one option you would definitely be navigating to is boot. To actually go ahead and select which devices you'll be using to boot up from, your boot mode selection. Very important if you're going to be using Windows 7 on this. And of course, once you're going to be installing Windows, be sure to select the device here that you'll be booting up from, a thumb drive, and go ahead and select that over here as well too. Moving along here, you do have the option for security. And just some options here that not too many people use, but you can actually set a password into the BIOS, or I believe even the option to put a password before the computer even posts or attempts to actually boot up. Some other options here as well too. Security device support if you plan to use this in conjunction with encryption like Secure Drive. and chassis intrusion configuration to actually notify you if the case has been opened, if you actually do have the hardware built in your case for that. There is that little connection on the motherboard for that. And of course your save and exit option. Moving along here, the OC overclocking option over here. A bunch of details here for your hardware, memory, and CPU. And of course you can manipulate a lot of things here. You can actually change the multiplier for the CPU if you plan to overclock, right over here. I'm actually leaving it on auto for the time being. I'm not planning to overclock on this particular computer, but I did actually manually change the memory frequency speed. Usually by default it is at 2133. I went ahead and changed it to 3000 to match the speed that this is actually using. And here as well too, you do have the AXMP option if you're going to be using one of these two profiles that are saved and configuration made specifically for the memory that you actually have in your system right now. You also have the option up here to also turn this on and toggle between the two options here as well too. Scrolling down, some more options for memory, and over here you do have the option to change clocking settings, which is very advanced stuff, so definitely don't change these unless you know what you're doing. Further down here, some voltage settings for the CPU. Again, very advanced stuff. Don't change these unless you know what you're doing. You could actually fry something or just cause your system not to post correctly anymore. Down here, just some more CPU spec information over here. And down here, clicking here, you'll see each particular information for each memory module. In this case, I have 2 memory modules. I end up 32 gigs. So you'll see the information for each one. Moving along, you do have the option for the M Flash, and this is basically if you're going to be flashing and updating your BIOS. Very important if you plan to use the latest generation AMD Ryzen CPUs. And obviously I am using the very latest and up-to-date BIOS as of the date of this video. But clicking here would actually give you the prompt to actually boot up, reboot the computer, so make sure that you have any USB thumb drive with your BIOS ready to go. Moving on to the right side over here, you do have the option to save particular overclocking settings. So in case you want to actually play with them or go refer back to them in a future date, you can actually save them over here, and some options to actually save them and load them from a USB thumb drive. And here come probably one of the two of my favorite options over here. Hardware monitor, where basically you can control the fans and the temperature layouts for the fans and also the CPU fan as well too. To basically control how fast or how slow the fans will spin depending on the temperatures of each particular device. Now you can actually set these to be auto or manual as well too. You can actually see here, I can go ahead and manipulate the speed of both of these fans. Just bring it up here, you'll see that fan 1's RPM is starting to increase. Moving along here, we have the Board Explorer, which kind of basically tells you devices highlighted in red that are actually currently in use. So here are the memory chips. Actually see some details there as well too. Fans that are actually plugged in, so in case you don't have access to see inside your computer case and do not have a window or a tempered glass, you can actually view it here. Video card over here, you can actually see that there. More fans over here. Devices, front panel or rear panels that are connected here for more USB connections. USB 3. Another USB 3, you can actually see there's something plugged in here, which is basically my little wireless keyboard. And of course here, the 6 SATA ports telling you what is plugged into each one. There are definitely more options, and many options actually in the motherboard I actually haven't gone over. Feel free to definitely go ahead and shoot me over any question you may have. Definitely help you as much as I can. I have been using MSI motherboards for some time, and the BIOSes actually have been looking pretty much the same, bouncing between these two options over here. And here's a pretty good, well-lit view of the motherboard in action at this time. A little noisy since the CPU fan's revving up a little faster than I actually had set up in the motherboard. Down there you can actually see the chipset fan that is currently off. I actually hardly ever hear or even see that fan in action, but I do know it does turn on at some point, particularly when gaming, as I have noticed on other X570 boards. So I'm very sure this is actually going to be no exception, and the fan will actually do its job when it only needs to and only has to. I really hope you enjoyed this little overview of this particular motherboard. I've already actually purchased this motherboard for 3 different builds. This is now the 3rd one, and have it in mind as well too for future builds as well too. It's a pretty good sweet spot on the middle ground as well too for X570 builds. As I mentioned before, I did actually have the B550 board in mind, but unfortunately, just because it's not accepting 2nd generation CPUs, and particularly not too future-proof to some degree, a little concern there, and other people online can probably agree there too. Just went ahead with this particular board. If you guys have any questions, shoot a comment, shoot a like, subscribe, let me know what you think. I'll definitely be doing some more reviews later on another motherboard, and of course CPUs as well too, once I get my hands on them. And of course, they're in stock as well too. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Take care.